Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to an all-new reaction and review. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be checking out a movie from 1988. But before we get into what that movie is, I mean, if the title wasn't obvious enough, here is exactly, once again, why I am having my third crack at the whip this series. Now, it all started with a YouTuber called Emma Prevost, who made his living, well, I don't quite know what his job was in real life, but he did this YouTube channel where he would stick on a movie and periodically just talk about parts of the movie before giving an overall review. The reason why this formula for me worked is because after just watching the movie, he could just get straight into talking about it to the audience, and he had the tagline of honest reviews, no bullshit. Mr. Prevost had the idea nailed down that he wasn't going to lie about whatever he just witnessed, and he just told everybody exactly what his honest to God opinions were. Which you might say that's a pretty good idea. The problems Mr. Prevost have, however, were in execution. Because if you go into the comments section for some of his videos, sometimes he will respond to people, but unfortunately at times he comes across as, sadly, someone very negative, someone very, very intrusive on certain people's conversations, and a lot of people have criticized his overall attitude when it comes to his videos. I mean, I'm going to just do this very, very quickly. I'm going to pull out an example of the sort of thing I'm talking about. Sorry guys, this will take all but a moment, because Mr. Prevost did this a lot in his day, so I'm trying to find, let's do a recent video he did of Hey Good Looking. I'm just gonna go into the comments very, very quickly. Because he usually is quite prevalent in this. What is that? Sorry about that. Okay, well, it technically doesn't really seem to be. I think this was because, and I'll explain why he may not have been. I'll try something a little bit older. Just to give you an idea about the sort of things I'm talking about. Let's do... I'll try and find one... Let's just try REM laser, creating REM laser. Usually would be in here this... Well, okay, well the problem is that, well, the thing is that Mr. Prevost had just under 1,000 videos on his channel to his credit, which for all the movies he's watched, there's a lot of things to dig into in there. I say that because very unfortunately Mr. Prevost passed away about 4 years ago, and it's sort of a very sad chain of events that sort of led up to him. I mean, he was losing friends, he was making videos about him going into hospital, and I don't want to necessarily say I don't want to necessarily make assumptions about Mr. Prevost's well-being before or after the chain of events happened, but he died, I believe it could have been possibly of heart disease, or because you could see he was quite a big man, is what I'm trying to say, and whether or not it was heart disease or if it was anything related to other, I think it's safe to say we hope very much Mr. Prevost to rest absolutely in peace, and I give my regards to his family or any of his relatives. I say that because I still liked what he did. I liked his very no-nonsense, just tell it as it is attitude with his videos. There could have been other problems. There could have been things he could have addressed, and I think there were certain ways he could have like handled himself better when it came to talking about to his people in the comments, but you live and learn through these things, it would seem. Now, the whole point was that on 2 occasions I tried to get like a separate little series on this channel going about talking about movies. My first was doing a review of Ghost in the Shell, the 1995 anime, and I might possibly watch it again for the references in the future, only because I didn't particularly really get into the movie. I understood the plot, I understood what was going on, but it was kind of just, that was it. It didn't really leave much impact on me, I guess you could say. Which is really strange given the sort of reception it had back in the day, and it still has a cult to this very day. And there were only 2 other videos I made which were of film reactions. The first was the loneliness of the long distance runner, and the second was a 2016 animated film called Harmony. And I loved both of those movies, and I did those videos around about a year ago to this day. But through one thing led to another, and unfortunately I never really got round to doing it. However, now that I have a more appropriate schedule, we are going to be doing these once every Sunday. We're going to do a Sunday evening sort of film, and it's a good way it's a great way for me to relax. It's a great way for me to just wind down and just enjoy something for the sake of enjoying it. And I will be giving my critiques at the end of the film, just to make sure that, well, for this video not necessarily to be wasted. Also, before we get into talking about the film, I also want to give my send my prayers to another YouTuber that I follow quite regularly called Mr. React 2 Central, who has unfortunately he lost his channel a number of months ago, and he's trying to build himself back up. He's trying to get back on his high horse, and I've got all the respect in the world for this guy because he's really, really likable. But unfortunately, he was admitted to hospital possibly due to pneumonia-related problems. They're not saying it's COVID-19, so I'm not going to say it either. I wish him all the best, and I hope he makes a very speedy recovery. It's just I don't necessarily want to lose 2 really nice people. And again, I say of Mr. Prevost because I'm actually adamant that even though I have no evidence of this in real life, I'm pretty sure Mr. Prevost was actually a really nice man. Now, with that being out of the way, we're going to talk about the subject of today's film, and it is a film from 1988. That movie is Alan Parker's Mississippi Burning. It's got Willem Dafoe and Gene That's like almost a match made in heaven for if you're like a very sort of like general sort of like movie enthusiast, or that's almost win-win right there. Now, what I'm gonna have to like emphasize next again is that because I know this is a movie about I believe it's meant to be a film about very, very high levels of racism in the southern states, in Mississippi itself. Also because I do have a little bit of a memory of this movie. It was when I was studying, when we were doing classes on slavery when I was 13 years old. So it would have been coming up to just about 10 years since I saw like about 45 minutes of this movie, and I think it mostly I think it was like in the first 30 minutes of the film. Now with that being said, I am really, really looking forward to this, because this is for a hard 18 rating. This also gets a very, very good reception from the critics on the back. Uniformly excellent by Empire magazine. And I don't want to waste anyone's time anymore, because all I want to do is see what I've been missing out on. So if you're ready at home, and I'm most certainly am ready, it's time to kick back, relax, and check out Mississippi Burning. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that was Mississippi Burning. We'll just shut that off now. And I'll, let's see which one's the... Oh, that's much better. Whew. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was really eye-opening. That's the first thing I've got to get off my knock that one straight off get that one off the bat first. It's fascinating because after not seeing, well, like you may remember me saying in the beginning that I watched a couple about like 45 minutes of it back when I was about 13 years old. I'm glad I finally got to see this again because it took me back. It took me aback just to work out that really you could have like summarized everything from the very first shot of there being a sink reserved for whites and there was a sink reserved for the blacks. In the very first shot of the film, it was very, very obvious that the movie was going to have a very, very strong stance on what was taking place, because it was the very first, basically the first scene of these three civil rights guys, one black man and two white guys, and when you see these ominous pickup trucks following them, and they get pulled over by a sheriff, and they basically have their brains blown out, and which is basically almost like the premise of the story is about Ward, played by Willem Dafoe, and Richard Anderson, played by Gene Hackman, to investigate exactly what's happened. And it's taken them back to Jessup County, where I know if I will, Anderson was sort of like raised in a different part of Mississippi, but they make it very, very plain as day to Anderson that this was a very, very different, that he wasn't he's basically not from Mississippi anymore, because, well, that's really, and the aspect, the view of what the folk in Mississippi are, and I would love to absolutely get some very solid verification if this is true, because their views on people from places like Chicago or in Washington or anywhere north of basically the South, they have some very, very specific phrases they want to call them, and unfortunately, probably for the sake, actually more of a relief for the sake of this passage, that I in absolutely no way going to share exactly what they say, because if there's one reason I'd say absolutely they give this an 18 rating, because the language that is used is appalling enough. You'll see people were mostly, in fact it's almost all white characters say the N-word freely as though they were just saying hello, and they also have a very specific view towards outsiders as well, and that's which is just as vile if anything they call it. And again, I'm not even going to specifically go over what they say, because there's absolutely no way I'll be able to get this out in any other case. But then of course, that's just first off, I wanted to kind of like discuss actually the idea of the casting, because having a young Willem Dafoe and I'd say just about a middle-aged Gene Hackman, it was a brilliant decision, because you've got Ward, who's now become in a pretty senior position, a pretty high up position in the FBI, and he has his own particular views, believing that he can change the world through one step at a time. Anderson, however, is a little bit more of a realist, and that's the biggest thing you're going to see between these two, is that Ward plays it by the book, and Anderson just knows how these people, their mindsets work. And and in many ways, it's probably because of Anderson's logic throughout this film is why the Klan's members were reprimanded and arrested, and it was just. It was a brilliant, really series of events, because it was just basically that. It was a series of events that led up to their arrests, which you could in many ways argue it makes the film have a bit of an anti-climax, because there's no real big sort of like watching just entire streets burn to the ground. It's just about a cleverly series of devices in order to reprimand these people, get these people arrested. And speaking of actually getting arrested, among other things, imagine my surprise when I found out that the late great drill sergeant R. Emery was in this movie. Emery, of course, played the drill sergeant. Oh God, I'm trying to think. I know fine well what the drill sergeant in Full Metal Jacket. I've not seen Full Metal Jacket for quite a long time, but I know fine well that it's 100% him. That was quite an interesting little surprise. What was another really interesting surprise is that this movie also stars Tobin Bell, most known probably throughout as playing serial killer John Kramer in the Jigsaw in the Saw franchise. So that was really, really interesting. It was interesting to see the Green Goblin and Jigsaw in the Jigsaw and Drill Sergeant Gunnery. I think it was Gunnery, Drill Sergeant Gunnery, all in the same movie, which that's very, very unique. I can say that much. And also, I just gotta. And listen, getting back slightly on track to what I said about the very, very, they make no pretense to show the obvious prejudice, the racism, and also the violence is brutal in a lot of other times. It's not just because you see guys in Klans gear with white hoods just beating the living crap out of black people, ambushing them when they come out of church in the evening, burning down farms, killing a whole dozens of cattle. And there's one scene in particular. This black dad who's carrying around a shotgun because he's finally going to put these people down once and for all. He gets ambushed from behind, and they attempt to hang him from a tree, and it's right up against the scene where the barn is up in flames, and the imagery is, well, there's no other way of putting it. It is a little bit scary because I sort of like knew a little bit going into this movie that, well, when you've got like imagery like this of a burning cross, and also there's the actual pretty much the frame of that man getting hung from a tree, I kind of had an idea that the movie was going to be brutal, and to be brutally honest, it was. I make no real pretense about. There was even a scene where Ward was about to murder Anderson because they had a very strange conflict of interest into how they can reprimand the members of the clan. It was really interesting because again they've been sort of like getting on each other's nerves throughout a large portion of the film, because Ward goes a little bit mad with power, like about 20 minutes into the film. He starts ordering hundreds of other FBI workers. He orders his crew, this guy called Ward, to just buy up the motel that they are staying in, just so they won't be thrown out. Then he orders hundreds of guys from the Navy to search the entire swamp to see whether or not the civil rights guys had been chucked in there. It's just everything piles up on one another. It's true, the violence, the very explicit prejudice in Mississippi during 1964 is when this is supposed to be set. And finally, at the end, I said the ending's a bit of an anticlimax, but it was really, really interesting to see that they did it absolutely flawlessly. And despite the fact that the wife of one of the police officers just had her home pretty much ransacked because she squealed to the FBI guys, and basically she was almost beaten half to death by her husband. There's just... I know fine well. So I absolutely had to applaud the movie for just... It's the brutal reality of exactly what was going on during the mid-60s, following pretty much the immediate death after Martin Luther King. And I gotta lay it into you, ladies and gentlemen, because I knew this was sort of a thing I kind of like wanted to bring up at some point, because I would say absolutely I'm fortunate enough to have never really grown up in a time where that sort of prejudice didn't really exist. Besides, if you did hold a prejudice, especially when I was growing up in school and all that, they would make you a pariah almost instantly. Like, that sort of thing was almost, well, it is unforgivable. And fortunately, I've never really seen any real displays of racism when I was in school or kind of like elsewhere for that matter. And there are, however, there was only one real thing I did have to say about this, because of the only real example of, like, we don't really have things like the KKK in the UK as I've never seen them myself. I think I'll call myself very lucky in that aspect. There was, however, one day I do remember, back about 9 years ago, this is more for my sister and my brother. They used to go to this performing arts college. We used to go there on Saturdays. I would sort of like just go there just because, I kind of like wanted to, be with them in that sense. And I would just like read or do homework or whatever whilst they were doing their own thing. It usually lasted about like 3 or maybe 4 hours or stuff like that. There was a good times. They did that for about 2.5 years they were there. Anyway, the point is that on one Saturday afternoon, I think this was like about May of 2013 when this happened. I just decided that I was going to tell my mother and my brother and sister that I was just going to go into town and do a little bit of shopping. I had my phone on me at the time, and I was just going to be back. I'll be back in about like an hour or so. And when I went out, there was unfortunately news that and I don't remember if there was a football game on that afternoon, because, well, some of them were wearing like football jerseys and all that. Others, however, were wearing the trademark of the EDL, otherwise known as the English Defence League. And as the name would, and the name was pretty much what you might expect. And fortunately, I had enough sense to literally just stay out. But I gotta tell you what, that like when I went out, and the way you go from like the dance from the school and all that, you have to sort of like go through Central Station and then up towards Nunn and Northumberland Street. They were everywhere. They all had white face paint on. They all had the flag of St. George painted on their faces, or they were all wearing them, and they were also carrying around banners. There must have been at least maybe 300 of them in total. It was like a sea of white. And unfortunately, I that's about as much detail as I actually do have. I don't remember, well, staying around their company for too long, because I thought they looked like they were ready to attack someone. They look, and basically with a small army that size, you knew it wouldn't take much to get them to actually do it. But that's literally the closest I've ever come to know anything like the like the KKK in the UK, and I think we can all sort of look and say that's probably very fortunate, because they said that they make some very profound statements about why are they being brought up to hate. What exactly... They get it rubbed into them at education. They've rubbed it into them so much that they don't know any different. And it's terrifying that you can just grow up with that much hate around people that we're supposed to get. I admit I'm perplexed and still very confused about the whole business, because it devolves pretty much all the way back down to slavery. And listen, I've mentioned this before, that when I was 13 years old, when I was in year 9, the first thing we studied in history was slavery, and some of the things that I saw that were true, well, some of the things I heard about the way that basically calling them slaves is they were treated like cattle. That's what they were. They were just like, as though they were just ready to be let loose, and then put them to work and basically let them die with the only comfort is the skin they wear. And it's I can't necessarily put into words about how disgusting it really all is, because I don't think there's any real words I can put in to convey what horrors that could have been, for just hated, literally treated like cattle simply for existing. And I'll say this much for Mississippi Burning, because I'm gonna sort of like wrap up this sort of this review. If Mississippi Burning sets out to do at least one thing, is that possibly for future generations, and no doubt there have been countless other films of its kind which depict the brutality of exactly what class segregation looked like, almost at its very worst. Because we need more examples of this in the future. We need examples to show exactly what life was like, simply to show why we need to work to be incredibly more tolerant of each other. It seems simple. In fact, nothing could be any simpler than that, because why? Why can't they be just like? Why can't we just let them? Why should we have such an issue? I mean, it's an outdated idea that they should be treated any different than us. I reckon if I come back to watching that movie at some point over in the future... In fact, actually, there was a movie I also kind of like want to check out. Maybe I'll check it out next week. It's called Moonlight, and it was voted the best film of like 2018, I think it was. 2018 or 2017, but that's sort of like... I don't know if it's wholly addresses the problems of race. I'm thinking of like Sienna, I think, or Selma. I think it was either called Sienna or Selma, that was actually about Martin Luther King. But I feel as if like I would have to maybe revisit some of my revisit what I know about slavery, and of course what it just to understand the history, just so I can get some perspective about how badly they've been treated, and why it's beneath our dignity to behave as disgusting, as abhorrent as that. That's certainly a beginning. So anyway, I hope all of you guys have enjoyed this review of Mississippi Burning. Please make sure to leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below. Let me know if you've seen the movie for yourselves, and let me know what you thought of the movie as well. Please also make sure to leave comments if you want to request any other films, and I'll see what I can get round to, and I will hope to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye for now.